We're live.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate Trinka and I am the Global Read Coordinator for this year, and we are so excited to have you here with us today. And we have our host, Mimi Hicklin, with the Charter for Compassion Coordinator, and of course our guest Vanessa Hearst talking about her book, A Constellation of Connections. But before we get to these two lovely ladies, I'd like to thank you again for being here, and if you enjoy this program and the work that the Charter's doing, please visit our website and donate. I want to also tell you about the amazing slate that we have following our kickoff guest today. So again, today we have Vanessa Hearst with us with her book, A Constellation of Connections, Contemplative Relationships. You are in for a treat. But in July on the 24th, we have Robin DiAngelo with her book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. In September, we have Daniel Goleman joining us with his book, A Force for Good, the Dalai Lama's Vision for Our World. And on October 9th, we have Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, talking about her book, Climate Justice. Then in November, Benjamin Sains will be here with us talking about his young adult book called Aristotle and Dante, Discover the Secrets of the Universe. And finally, in December on the 10th, we have Catherine Wilkinson, the senior writer for Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. So we're super excited to bring you all of these amazing authors, but today we're starting with Vanessa Hearst. Thank you, ladies, for being here with us today. I just wanted to remind the audience that if you have questions for Vanessa, please feel free to use the chat room to propose any of those questions, and we will open up that dialogue later on in this call today. So thanks again. Welcome, ladies. You can take it from here.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
As Kate said, I'm Mimi Hicklin. I'm the coordinator for the Charter, and I am so honored to be having this conversation. I have published Vanessa's blogs on our website for years now, and so when Kate said that she was going to be a part of the Global Read program, I was just really excited. So I loved this book, and I cannot wait to pick your brain about it. So let's jump in.
All righty.
Just to start, the book is about being in relationship. So sort of to lay some groundwork, you claim that each relationship is a triad or a triangle of divine sparks. Can you just briefly describe what that triad is?
Yes. So every person inside of them, I took this based upon a Kabbalah myth, is that at the conception of our spirit, the Creator carved off a piece of itself and blew it into us. And that's our divine spark. So when we connect with other people, we have a divine spark connection. But we're never just person to person or creation to creation. The Creator is always a part of that. So that is the third spark in our divine spark triad.
Okay. So the first spark, the triad, then would be the self, right?
Correct. It's always about ourselves. That's the most important relationship that we have. And so people sometimes say, well, how can it be a triad if it's just a relationship with ourselves? It's a triad because it's our true authentic self, and then the illusions we have about ourselves, and then the sacred spark as well. So that's how we have a triad even when we're with ourselves.
Okay. So I want to dig in a little bit deeper just about how our relationship with ourselves sort of forms the foundation of our relationship with all others. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. If we don't have a relationship, what I'm going to call it is an authentic relationship with ourselves, a relationship where we really know who we are. If we live in illusion, then what happens is we can never form good relationships or authentic relationships with other people. So if we believe, say that someone looks at us and they see our reactions, or they see a part of us, they see the facade of who we are. If we believe that's who we are instead of who we are authentically. I was working with a client one day and she told me, she said, I want to be more eccentric. She said, I want to dress a little bit differently. She wanted to bring out who she really was, but she was dressing very, very conservatively, and she showed people her professional side. But inside there was this wild child waiting to get out. So what she did gradually over the course of about 18 months is that she really claimed who she was inside, that she wasn't this person who, as she described herself, uptight. And so unless we really embrace who we are, in our inner self, then we really can't be in relationship in a really authentic or true way with other people.
That's really interesting. And actually, you kind of read my mind, because I was going to ask you, in relationship to self, one of the meditations at the end of one of your chapters asks that you spend some time in self-reflection, discerning what is illusion versus what is authentic self. How does one go about discerning that?
You know, a lot of it is what I call full body listening. It's really knowing who you are, and then being aware of what I call tells, are signs. So if something's out there, and illusions aren't necessarily bad, because you can look in the mirror and see that you're a 40-year-old instead of being a 60-year-old, if you look at that. So they're not necessarily bad, but they're not true representations. Or we can think that something that we say to another person is really okay, when the illusion is that we can be a little bit more compassionate. So when we're in those reflections, what I usually say to myself is, did I cause harm? And even by causing harm, was I sharing a part of myself that really wasn't true to me, that came from a part of me that was wounded? And so a lot of it is that we have to take a deep look in how we're sharing ourselves with others, and if that comes from a woundedness inside of ourselves, which isn't necessarily bad. So those reflections about if we're being true or authentic is really going to dig into some of the messiness of who we are, and then to really begin to embrace that. So if we listen to our bodies, usually if something is an illusion that is not true about me, I'll feel that. Maybe I'll feel a tensioning in my solar plexus, or my shoulders will feel really heavy, where if it's accurate, I will feel really light and joyful. So it's really getting in touch with what our bodies are saying to us, because our emotions and our thoughts and our spirit channel into our bodies. It's the vehicle that we live this life with. So it tells us things, and we just have to learn to listen and then trust what we hear.
Okay, so the body, the relationship with your body is also sort of a facet of your relationship with yourself, and learning to trust your body and your body's intuition.
Exactly. I mean, and that for me is that we have four aspects. We have body, mind, spirit, and heart, our emotions. And so it's really learning to listen and to trust, and to have that relationship with our body. And what I found is a lot of us don't like necessarily what our bodies look like. And I work with people about they want to look younger. They want to look more together. They want to be a size 0 instead of a size 14. And so it's really beginning to say to people is, what is that body saying to you? And how can you learn to love yourself? And the more you love yourself, the more open and receptive you are, is to listen to that dialogue between your body and your emotions and your body, and, you know, even your internal monologue, what it's saying and how it is impacting your body.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point. I'm wondering how you connect with or full body listen to your body if you feel disconnected or unhappy with your body, or even if like your body is failing you, or you perceive your body to be failing you in some way.
And that's the practice of self-compassion, because you can't be in relationship with yourself and not be compassionate towards yourself, not love yourself for for what you perceive as imperfections. And it's just a way of becoming, I guess, stronger and more. Your relationship is strengthened with practicing self-compassion. So you know what? Maybe there's a part of you that you don't like, but unless you befriend that part of yourself, and self-compassion is how you befriend that part of yourself, you're never going to be able to, I think, be holistic in the relationship with yourself. And then you won't be able to have healthy relationships with other people either, because you'll be projecting those illusions that you see about yourself into the relationships.
Right. I was going to say, when we started about how the relationship with yourself is foundational to your relationship with others, that self-compassion really ties in, just because it's sort of a cheesy saying, but that you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to fill your own cup first. And you talk about this a little bit in your book about how you can't really be loved for who you are until you love yourself.
Right. And I think that the thing is, though, Mimi, is that you don't have to 100% love yourself. It's all a journey, but you have to be open to loving yourself and not fear the parts of yourself that people call the shadow, or that's the false self. You have to really be willing to love it, because it's all a package. And so what I've grown to see is that those parts of yourself that are false, or that you see as imperfections, are really life lessons. And they're things for us to learn about so that we can grow to love ourselves. But not only, if you love something about yourself that you really, that you don't necessarily like, it's going to be a whole lot easier for you to begin to love other people for their imperfections. And I'm not going to say in spite of, but for their imperfections, because we're all on this journey together. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, I had kind of picked up on, you have to love yourself to be better loved, but like you're saying, you also have to know how to love yourself in order to better love others.
Exactly, because if you really love yourself unconditionally, it's going to be a whole lot easier not to judge somebody else, because you've been there. And so maybe in your mind you're judging, but maybe you're going to say to yourself, how did that person get there? Or why is that person doing this? Or what's the suffering? So it's always, you're feeling it with your heart, but you're moving into your head, and you're always trying to figure out how you can be better in relationship with that person.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. I do want to jump to another spark in the triad, the relationship with the sacred. I'm hoping you can just talk about that for a little bit, maybe how you personally connect with the sacred, or other ways that people have found effective for connecting with the sacred.
So what I always tell people is that I think that we're people who like to be given permission. So what I say to people is sometimes people see that the sacred is God, and that's perfectly okay, whatever their image is. But I've had an evolution from seeing God to recognizing that the sacred is in what I call the extraordinary. And so when I am mindful, the way I connect, I teach Tai Chi at noon. And so I have had this sparrow that has come and chattered with me all the time I'm practicing. And he's like 3 to 6 feet away from me the whole time. And so for me, it's really looking at the beauty, all of the different colors in that sparrow. That's the sacred. Or seeing the sacred in somebody's smile, seeing the sacred. Sometimes what I do is I think I engage in prayer throughout the day, is that listening to how the sacred speaks through all of us. And so I would say that I connect in a variety of ways. Before I get up in the morning, I've got a simple meditation that connects me not only to my person, but to the ground and to the earth. So I do what's called anchoring and shielding. And so in that way, it's kind of energizing a bubble around me, so I'm more aware of the sacred. And then sometimes throughout the day, it's just breathing into the moment and asking myself, how is the sacred calling to me? And what does that mean? And so if I can hold that as what is the sacred saying to me, then anything that happens when I'm out and about, even if I'm in connection with someone I call the intimate stranger, someone I might only be in relationship with for 30 seconds, if they do something that, if I'm not in connection with the sacred, I might get angry and react, I'm more able to soften myself and to share compassion with them in whatever way that means. And even if it's just softening my stance and looking at them with compassionate eyes. So for me, it is, how can I connect to everyone? And I guess it's a conscious intent to look for the sacred in everything, and really see that divine spark in every person and every opportunity. Because even if I can't respond to it in that moment, I can always reflect on later, how was it present?
Wow, thank you. Yeah, that was great. And it really speaks to the connection between that dynamic triad. How we were talking about full body listening, it sounds like connecting with the sacred involves a lot of, first, having a foundational relationship with your body and being able to be hyper aware and with all of your senses sort of open to hearing, feeling, seeing the sacred in your everyday.
Exactly. And I mean, that's the whole thing. It's a willingness not to set boundaries or put God or the sacred in a box, is to even open your eyes to the day, curious about how the sacred is going to manifest to you in a different way. And that to me helps me create, or it helps me flow more easily in relationship then.
Okay. So sort of the obvious relationship that I think everybody is aware of is the relationship with others.
Right.
I think that that's the one that everyone just thinks of when you say in relationship. And maybe a question that you get really often in terms of being in relationship with the other is how to be in relationship with the other when the other is challenging to us with different political or spiritual views, or for whatever reason, it's just really difficult to be in relationship with.
So one of the things that I think is key is to engage in a form of conversation that I'm going to call dialogue, because sometimes I think words really matter if we can pull it out of that. And with dialogue, what you do is that you, first of all, listen with intent to really understand where the other person is coming from. And what I always say is that doesn't mean that you agree with them. Understanding sometimes means that you can state why you disagree with them, but you do it in a gentle, loving way. So you listen with intent, and then you respond with compassion, because compassion is probably the greatest thing that you are ever going to do whenever you're in relationship. It's that willingness to enter into the third part of being in contemplative relationship, which is communion. And for me, what communion is when we're engaging in conversation, I'm really intentionally listening to you, but I'm listening to more than the words. I'm listening to your tone. I'm listening to your body language. I'm also listening to my internal monologue, how I am reacting or responding to what you're saying. There was a study done in the 1960s that said only 7% of a conversation is actually the words that are said. So
Wow.
Think about that. So if we're so busy formulating our response or our reaction to what's being said, we're not hearing what the person is saying. And so I like to hear just to really understand where that person is coming from. Now, I will tell you, in this day, sometimes we can agree to be in relationship and to focus on what our commonality is, but there are other times that is not possible in the moment. And so the way I like to look at that is that what I've come to realize is we're all energetic and we're all very intuitive. So sometimes what happens is that we're not meant to be in alignment with every person that we meet. So there's that grating that we sometimes feel with people, and it's okay to take a step back and to ask yourself, maybe you had a really close friend that you need to take 3 steps back and become an acquaintance with. Or maybe you find that an acquaintance is somebody that you're going to become closer with. But for me, when you have all of these differences, I always try to find common ground and even see if we can come to a point where we can reach consensus with a relationship. And when you reach consensus, everything evolves into something very different, as opposed to compromise that okay, we compromise and we've decided I won't talk about this issue because it raises all kind of red flags, and you won't talk about that. It's that how can we be in relationship with each other so we can set those things aside while still learning from each other. But that both parties really, both partners in that relationship really have to want that relationship to continue. But I guess what I'm saying with contemplative relationships, it's okay to shift a relationship. It's kind of like if you think about if a job isn't working for you and you leave a job, that was a relationship that wasn't working, so it was okay to go. So sometimes it's okay to give yourself permission to shift the way you're in relationship with that person. So even if it's someone that you is a family member that you've been with forever, maybe it's that you still interact with that person, but you don't interact on the deep level that you used to. And you're okay with that because we all shift, knowing that it could circle back around and it might not circle back around. But I think that's part of being open to the evolution of relationship. And that's what contemplative relationship is about.
It's so funny that you said that thing about words only being 7%, because as you're talking, I'm like, okay, I have so many things I want to respond. I need to listen intentionally rather than, but I have so many questions. I guess I just wanted to comment that it sounds like, or what you're saying is that in terms of people who are challenging, or especially with different, like in this day, political views or religious views, it's maybe less about those different views and more about if each person showing up to the conversation can show up the way that you're talking about, can listen intentionally with an open mind and be open for that connection, even if you're going to hear something that differs from your own belief system.
Right, but also knowing that in the end, what you have to decide is if you can be in relationship in the way the other person needs, not what they want, but in the way that they need. And if that other person can be in relationship in the way you need. And I think that's the most difficult thing. That's where the reflection and introspection really comes in. Because I know I've been in relationships before where I haven't been through that discernment process, and we've all had the relationships that have blown up. And so if you can have that where you actually know, okay, I've got to take a step back from this relationship, but I'm going to be honest and intentional about it. It's just like I'm not going to disappear off the face of the earth. I'm going to actually have a conversation, even if you just say I need to take a step back, or I can't get together. You might have other commitments that are more important, but it's those kinds of things. That's the end result of it. You can listen intentionally, but in the end, you've really got to decide if that relationship as it stands is a contemplative relationship for you.
Yeah, and then we're kind of back to the full body listening. We talked about it in relationship with ourself, in relationship with the sacred, and now I'm thinking, and I've said this to you before, there are just those people who you have conversations with, and for whatever reason, it triggers something in your body and you just feel kind of off or yucky. And it seems like being connected to your own body and listening to your body's intuition can be really helpful when you're determining how a relationship is going to shift or evolve.
Exactly. And I think the whole thing is, because you and I talked a little bit about this, is sometimes we meet somebody and we're kind of having that underlying uneasy feeling and we're thinking, I don't really want to go out to coffee with them because I'm not really feeling that we have a lot in common. But because, at least for me, I was raised, you have to be nice to everybody. And so being nice to everybody is not saying no. And so you enter into this relationship and you discover later why it was so uneasy. When if you had just taken a step back and given yourself permission to maybe not deepen that, to start the road to friendship, but be an acquaintance with that person, you would have discovered kind of what the issues were. So it is, you listen to your body, you listen to your intuition. I just think that our intuition speaks a lot. We just have to listen to it and then actually trust it.
Yeah. I really like that. And I really like how throughout the book you talk about how relationships can shift, how they can evolve, or you can separate, grow closer, release in each direction. And I just really appreciate the fluidity of that rather than breaking a relationship or being best friends right away. I like the concept of sort of an evolving relationship that can just shift as you each grow in whatever ways you grow.
And I love it that it's evolving, because sometimes when it's evolving, you have to let things go to make room for other things. And so then you take it's not bad or it's not good. You're not attached to it and you're non-judgmental. You're just in the moment of how your life is moving forward and how you're really living with purpose then in your relationships, and how you're giving other people the space to do the same.
Yeah, I read this quote, and now I don't know who said it, but something about along the lines of how a relationship can end and not be a failure. And that was such a freeing concept for me, that you don't have to make every relationship work. And in fact, sometimes when you step away, the relationship really is doing the work. But I wanted to just touch on, since you said it, coming from a place of non-attachment or non-judgment, can you discuss the 4 nons that you reference in the book?
So the four nons aren't negative. They're really based upon Buddhist philosophy. The first one is non-attachment. And so when we're non-attached, we're not detached, but we're not clinging either. So there's no aversion and there's no clinging. We're just in a space where we're the objective observer. So as an objective observer, it doesn't mean that we don't feel emotions. We're actually more engaged because we're not holding on to an end result. So we don't really want this relationship to work. We're open to seeing what happens. When you're non-judgmental, it doesn't mean that you don't have a judgmental thought in your mind. For me, what it means is that you're in awareness of when you might be judging, but you say, okay, that's a judgment, but I'm not going to react out of my judgment. I'm just going to hold that, and I'm going to say, okay, is it accurate or is it not? And so what I say is that sometimes when you're walking in a dark area at night and you hear somebody running up towards you, you could have a judgment that you might be in danger. And so you do something certain. So then that person runs past you because they're going somewhere else. But you take that, you say, okay, it's not all danger. So the next non is non-defensiveness. And for me, what basically that means is that I think we all have the propensity where we want to defend ourselves whenever we feel attacked or when somebody's making a comment about us. And so with non-defensiveness, we let that go. We're non-attached to that, and we don't feel the need to explain or to get the person to understand our viewpoint. And that's a shift too, because if we're sharing things because we want to share who we are and the depth of our being, that authenticity at the core, we're not really defending ourselves. We're just sharing who we are. And then the final non is really nonviolence. And with that is that we pay particular attention to not only our actions and our words, but how our thoughts are violent. And if we go back to the relationship with ourselves, what are we saying about ourselves that we really don't like? And how are those words harsh and critical or violent? And when we begin to stem those thoughts in our internal monologue, we can and shift those. It's all about re-scripting and reframing. So instead of saying I'm stupid, it might be, that wasn't the smartest thing that you've ever done in your life. And then really work with that on how can you make better decisions. So again, it all goes back to that relationship with self and how are we with ourselves, and then how can we use the 4 nons in other relationships.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's interesting. I'm thinking like we can only, we can't control other people. We can only control ourselves. So if we are in relationship with someone and we feel like, okay, we need to take a step back, or, and that person doesn't feel similarly, you can't control their reaction to your behavior. And so returning to the 4 nons as a sort of response to however they react to you can be really effective as a tool.
Exactly. And I think the thing is, as I said, that life isn't about you until it's about you. So what we can do is we can look, what you were saying is we can look at somebody else who's pushing all of our triggers, and then, but if you're practicing the four nones, they're really not being horrible. They're just being themselves. And if we can use the four nones to turn any of our reactions into a compassionate response, it will shift them too. And I've seen that happen in myself over and over again whenever I've really reflected on something that wasn't working quite right. When I've changed the way that I've responded to the person, there's been a shift in the relationship. And sometimes that shift is that we grow closer. And sometimes the shift is we don't have the same need anymore, and the relationship kind of grows apart.
Okay, well, you touched again on something that I was really hoping we would talk about, which is the transition from, or the move from, reaction to response. Can you talk about what reaction is versus what response is, and how we can move from reaction to response?
So I think all reaction is based upon fear. So we might feel really, really angry, but at the base of every reaction is fear. And so what I really try to do is get to the root of whatever's triggering us. And we're going to go back to full body listening again, Mimi, because we have to know how we're being triggered. And I will use as an example, I had a friend who had a physical illness that was not diagnosed. And it was something like MS, but it wasn't like MS. And when she was flaring in her illness, when I would talk to her on the phone because she was upset and agitated, I could feel that like hitting me. And I knew, I got to the point, the first couple of times we would wind up having an argument during the conversation. And then I said to myself, something's not right. And so I would get into that objective observer mode and really see how she was hitting upon me. And so I would know when I needed to end the conversation before all those triggers that she was saying. Again, she was not doing anything except hitting a lot of triggers. And if you ask me, it was the fear of the unknown illness, and we were about the same age, and she was sick and undiagnosed. What happened if something happened like that to me? So it was understanding that, but also understanding that if I couldn't negate that reaction, or if I couldn't negate the triggers and it was building, I had to know when to take a step back. And so our reactions, we're reacting to something someone says that isn't about what they're saying. It's about what's going on inside of us. And so when we're aware of all of those triggers, we have a choice. We can either react and say something hurtful or harmful, or do something that's hurtful or harmful, or we can ask ourselves, what is the most loving, gentle thing that I can do in this moment? And what I will say is sometimes our response won't necessarily be towards that person. Like for me, it was to disengage and say I had to go and end the conversation. That was self-compassion. So it's what can I do in the moment to respond to the situation, or to just sit in silence with the person. Sometimes whenever they're so angry, that can dissipate. And again, for me, compassion is more than just a word or an action. Sometimes it's just sitting quietly with another person and breathing compassion into the situation. And so if we look at reactions always based upon fear, and our responses always have at their root compassion.
Okay, so reaction is kind of like our instinct. If we're instinctively driven by fear, which is a bummer. But response involves more intention and maybe slowing down enough to sit with the situation before just making a knee-jerk reaction.
Right. And so it's about fully being engaged in the moment. It's about mindfulness. So if I'm fully engaged in the moment and I'm having a conversation with someone, then I'm not, what you were saying is that you were being intentional listening to me. I'm not listening to the 10 million questions that I want to ask, or I'm not listening to my judgments. What I'm really doing is paying attention to what is happening, so that I then have the choice of either holding on to those triggers, or in a lot of ways what I do is I can breathe in and out of those. So sometimes what I'll do is wrap them in a spitball. And I always imagine that I have fly paper that's hanging down. And sometimes I'll just easily, and then I'll blow it out onto the fly paper so that it doesn't go anywhere else. And so
Yeah.
in that way, it's just being very, very conscious and very aware of what I'm doing so that I can turn all of my responses into reactions, or reactions into responses. And then knowing that every once in a while, no matter what I do, that reaction is going to come out. So that's about the practice of self-compassion too.
And forgiveness.
And forgiveness. And that's part of self-compassion, I think, is the forgiveness, but then it's also the hard work. I might sit down and journal about what the heck was going on, Vanessa, that you couldn't stop your reaction. And then you learn from it, because that's what this is all about. We're learning until our last breath about how to really live on this world in relationship and responding to other people with compassion.
And if you are more in a habit of responding rather than reacting, obviously that benefits your relationship. I'm thinking about, you talk about how maybe with family members or friends that you've had forever, you can get in sort of patterns of relationship or ruts. And I'm thinking that might be a perfect opportunity to try to transform your behavior from reaction to response, instead of sort of anticipating someone as you have learned to know them, but rather really seeing them as they are in that moment and responding to them that way instead of reacting.
Exactly. And realizing, again, what we were talking about is that we are all evolving and growing into the people that we are, but not going into it with rose-colored glasses. I guess for me, it's being open and willing to see that a person changes, but know that some patterns are so deeply ingrained that that change doesn't happen. But so it's expecting the best, but being okay with what you get. Again, and then asking yourself, how do I need to shift to be in relationship? I know that I had a boss who came in and wanted to fire all of us, and someone let us know that. So it created a really harsh dynamic. And so I was always paranoid that she was going to fire me. And so one day I passed her in the hallway and she didn't say hi to me. So I went back to my office and I thought, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? So I went home and I was meditating that night, and a little voice inside of me said, you didn't say hi to her either, Vanessa. And so that totally changed the way that I responded, the way that I engaged her. And I tell people that when I left that job about 18 months later, she gave me the best reference I've ever had in my life.
Oh,
And
wow.
so for me, and I didn't do it because of anything other than I knew that I wasn't being authentic in the relationship either. I was letting my fear of being let go cloud all my interactions with her. And so that's what I'm saying, is that when you really operate from your authentic self, it's not about believing that that other person is going to do all the right things. It's believing that you're going to enter into the relationship knowing that you need to do what's true and authentic yourself.
Yeah. And something I always work on is forgiving yourself when you fall short of that, and reminding yourself that you too can start over at any moment.
Exactly. And so I always say to myself now, how close did you get to the mark? You know, maybe you fell short, but maybe it was only 10 feet this time instead of 120. So it's always looking for ways that, what did I do right? Because a lot of times we look at, oh my gosh, I failed again. I fell short. It's so ask yourself, what did I do right? And how can I build upon that, while not ignoring the things that you are telling yourself you didn't do quite right, that you might have hurt somebody, but really build upon the things that you're doing right.
Yeah, I had a situation that I was not totally pleased with how I reacted. And I was describing it to a friend, and she said, did you think that you were just gonna ride the bike with no training wheels for the first time perfectly? You can't do that. You're not always going to go through life flawlessly. And you have to practice, as you say, some self-compassion in those
Right.
moments.
So for me, Mimi, it's kind of like whenever I practice Tai Chi inside as opposed to going outside, the air blowing, the dynamic of balance is totally different. So what she said is did you expect that you'd ride a bike? That's perfect, because it's all about knowing in different situations we're not going to have the balance that we have in other relationships or other situations.
So we've been sort of skirting, it's come up several times, and obviously as the Charter for Compassion, I'm super interested in discussing exactly what this word compassion that we're throwing around, what it means. We talked about self-compassion and compassion for other people, but for you, what really is compassion?
So it's funny because I sat in meetings about 6 years ago where we would discuss what compassion was. And the meetings really upset me. And I reacted so badly that I wrote the book on compassion, because my first book is on engaging compassion, because everybody had this idea of what compassion was. And so after I wrote the book, I did some things called compassion conversations. And what I really believe that compassion is compassion is a lived experience. So what I ask myself, what does it mean for me to alleviate suffering, which might be very different from you, and it might shift in the moment. So to alleviate suffering, what I usually try to do is have a couple of $1 bills with me. So when I'm stopped at a light, if there's someone who is experiencing homelessness, if I have money, I might just give them a couple of dollars. Another person might take them out to eat. I might just sit with somebody who is really suffering. Another person I might talk with and engage them in a kind of, because I'm a life coach, I can't not do that in my life either, is that talk to people who I'm friends with about where they are in their life and kind of help them surface how to move forward. So for me, compassion could be writing a check to a food bank. It could be alleviating my own suffering by just getting up one morning and saying, okay, these are the 3 things I need to do. Then I'm just going to take a nap, or I'm going to spend some time journaling or walking. So it's anything that I believe might be alleviating suffering. It's what I've discovered is one of the greatest acts of compassion that I can do is in a grocery store is I can help the person in front of me load the conveyor belt. And I had one person after I did that tell me that she had broken her back, and she was like 80 years old and she was still doing all this stuff. And so I guess compassion is just my lived experience in the moment. What can I do to raise the vibration of joy in the world, and maybe raise it enough so that somebody can see the lesson in the suffering, because that's the other thing compassion for me is about. It's about kind of cleaning the windshield off of the mud off the windshield so we can clearly see what lesson we're going to have to learn in that suffering, because I really think that suffering is an opportunity to meet challenges, learn life lessons, and really live our soul purpose. So, and however compassion is speaking to me in that day, that's how I am. Whatever, I guess what I'm saying is whatever I need or what another person, I'm more so giving myself what I need, but I'm always on point, wondering what that other person needs and making sure that I'm not enabling them, because I think that's the other big thing is that we don't want to fix a problem for another person. We want to make sure that we're giving them the tools that they need to alleviate their suffering themselves.
I really like that. So compassion is very active as opposed to like pity. That's more of an emotion that you're not necessarily doing anything with.
Right, because compassion starts with what's called affective empathy, is that we're really feeling the emotions of another person. But we can't just, sometimes when we get stuck in that's when we have pity, or we enable another person's, I'm going to say, bad behavior. And then what we do is in the spiral of compassion, we move into something called cognitive empathy, where we recognize that we're feeling the emotions, the suffering of another person. And we ask ourselves, what do we need to do to alleviate that? And so sometimes if somebody's just sitting and crying and there's nothing you could do, it might be holding their hand or just holding space for them, and that's compassion. Other times it's being very, very active. what we're called to do is to move from affective to cognitive to what's called behavioral empathy. Our behavioral empathy is also compassion. And so it's that spiral. But again, for us, when we're in relationship, it's also to ask ourselves, where are we getting stuck in that? And how can we learn to move out of that so that we can be more powerful in our compassion, but being more effective as a partner in relationship?
Okay, I'm looking at the clock, and I asked you to do a meditation because I just loved all of your meditations. But before you do it, and maybe this is a good question that I wanted to touch on before lead into the meditation, is sort of strung throughout your book is the concept of silence.
Okay.
And that was really interesting to me just because the way that you present it is not necessarily literal absence of noise. I want to talk about how you get silent or make silence and what it is for you.
Okay, so for me, silence is an environment. It is a place where I am quieting my mind, not where you hear nothing, but when I quiet my mind, it's like you can hear the pin drop. It's what you were asking me earlier about what the sacred is for me. When I am resting in silence, I can hear everything that I'm saying. When I rest in silence and I do a body check, I can feel what's going on inside of me. When I'm in silence, I pick up those cues. So it's instead of just hearing the 7% and somebody says something that kind of hits me wrong, I can hear what's going on inside of them. I can hear maybe the tension in their voice, or I can see what's going on with them. So for me, silence is that environment where I can really focus on what's happening in the world and what's happening in myself. Now, to get there, sometimes sitting meditation, if you can do sitting meditation, is awesome because that will make you aware of your monkey mind, that internal monologue and what's going on. Walking the labyrinth really works for me. Tai Chi. So if you have any mindfulness or contemplative practice, that's a great way to get into silence. I tell people that the one thing that I did, and it kind of sounds counterintuitive, but it worked for me, was watching the news at night. Because I don't know if you ever talk at the television whenever you hear something. Well, I do. So what was interesting to me was cultivating that silence so that I could hear why I was reacting in the way that I was reacting. And so that's the other thing. It's that really, really having a listening ear. Benedict of Nursia says that you have to listen with the ear of your heart. And for me, that's what silence is that you use the four nons and you're listening, but you're listening in such a way that you're open to hearing what's going to happen. And so that takes, throughout the day, if I find myself getting really, really like tense, and I'm not able to listen anymore, I might just do 90 seconds of breathing, or even if I can just do 3 or 4 breaths. Or what I might do is I tell people I go for a walk, but sometimes it's more like a run until I get the angst out and I can calm. So it's really listening and doing whatever you need to do to release some of that buildup of angst and really begin to listen to the silence.
Yeah, I have found for me, definitely after a couple miles of running, even if I have earphones in, that's when I can feel the silence, when all that other stuff just sort of.
And so then what I will tell you too is when you're in silence, the world looks different. It might be brighter. You can hear the sounds in a very different way. Everything is different. It's I say that you pass the mundane and enter into the extraordinary. So you can really see, I think you can really see the sacred at work when you're in silence.
It's like a hyper awareness.
It is a hyper awareness, and that moves us into a different place too. And if we can stay hyper aware, gosh, what a gift that is.
Yes. Okay, Kate, it's so hard. I told you both I wouldn't be able to do this in an hour. So
well, oh my gosh.
Let's also let people know that if they have questions or any questions you didn't get to, I will answer those and people can watch those later.
Okay. And Kate, there was one question, right? Do we have time for
Yes,
a question
I
before
want to
meditation?
make a couple comments, and then I want to ask this question that one of our guests asked. I was just so taken by the book and the fact that at the end of each chapter, you sort of have these contemplative practices that people can do to sort of embrace and really, you know, grab hold of some of the concepts that you wrote about, and then obviously you just spoke about. You know, one of them, when you talk about your full body listening and sort of the check-in, just having been through compassionate integrity training, we have something called tracking, and then we do grounding and resourcing, and it's all the things that you're talking about, you know. And so it was just really fun to engage with different ways of thinking or words to describe that. So thank you. I want to just address this question from Kevin. He asks, self-compassion seems to be trending these days, and while it is essential to begin there, how can we all better educate people about alleviating the suffering of others?
Oh gosh. You know what? I think that the greatest thing that we can do to educate is to educate by our own actions, to educate in the way that we're doing things. And I really think, Kate, that the book that I wrote in the beginning, that Engaging Compassion Through Intent and Action, I wrote that to educate people that that suffering in the world exists, but to ask yourself, what can I do to alleviate that suffering? And where is my comfort zone and being okay? So if I go back to, there are people in this world that are starving. So what can we do? I've got friends who will take people that are experiencing homelessness out and share a meal with them. Other people will write a check. I think that the biggest thing that we should do is not negate anyone where they are with their suffering, or where they are with alleviation of suffering. And then to ask yourself, I also believe that we have to do it one-on-one. Sometimes we all want to do something that will impact 300 people, 1,000 people, change the world. But sometimes it means that we start small, and then are affiliated with different organizations, and decide what can we do. And I think first of all, we name it as suffering, and we are very careful that we don't judge. And then we don't defend how our actions either. And really, I think, talk to people about how can we alleviate suffering and go from there, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's sort of like, what can we do in our circle of influence? And then maybe that circle of influence grows as we make these connections and relationships.
Well, and recognize that compassion is a spiral. So your compassionate act doesn't stop with that person that you were compassionate to. It spirals out into the world. You never know where it ends. And I think that's the big thing, is that recognize that you might not, with your action, change the life of any more than one person, but your action might change the life of millions of people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And before we go into the meditation, I just want to remind first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here. And then also, please, I'll put in the chat room our website address for the rest of the global reads that are coming up. And I have thoroughly enjoyed this. So I'll just let you take the lead here now with this meditation, and let's everyone stay with us, and we'll see you at the end here.
Great, thank you. All right. In chapter 17 of my book, Constellation of Connections, I talk about moving from intent to action, or from actio to intent, from intentio to actio. And so what I'm going to do is lead you through a meditation. I'm going to invite you to just close your eyes and breathe into the moment. And this is a 5-step process that, again, it's in my book. And if you got the study guide, it's part of the study guide for chapter 17. So as you breathe, I want you to ask yourself, what is your intent? And this intent can be just for the moment. It can be your day intent, or it can be your life intent. I'd like you just to hold that in the palm of your heart. Now, the second step of this process is called meditatio, or meditation. So I'd like for you to turn your awareness to the sacred in your life. And ask yourself, how are you being invited to manifest your intent? What's happening in this moment? What is happening throughout your day? Maybe you see a common ribbon that goes through your day or your life. And then ask yourself, what distractions are preventing me from living my intent? And recognize these are not bad or good. They're fluid. You might see different distractions at different times. Just be aware of maybe one or two distractions that get in the way of your intent. Now we're going to move into oratio, which is prayer or petition. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to reformulate your intent. Maybe it shifted a little bit during meditatio, but just send your petition of your intent out into the world. And so you're forming your oratio with both your intent and your awareness of any distractions that are preventing you from being intentional. Now I'm going to invite you into contemplatio, or contemplation. In contemplation, it's a quiet listening to the gentle whispers of your intuition. So when you listen in contemplatio, you're being guided in ways to express your intent. The fifth and final part of this is actio. And in actio, it's the actual action. But today, what I would want you to do is to just reaffirm what actions, and remember these can be thoughts, words, or actual physical actions, what action you can take in the moment or sometime today to connect your intent with your action. And recognize that you can do this meditation in the morning from intentio to actio to set your intent for the day. You can do it at brief moments to reconnect to your intent throughout the day. So what I'm going to do now is just to invite you to be aware of your surroundings and to come back into the webinar.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can't think of a better way to start my day. So that was and we're right at the end of the hour. So this was recorded. Everybody who's here and everybody who registered will get a recording, and we'll also put the video up on our YouTube, and you can share that link when I send it out.
Awesome.
If anybody has questions for Vanessa, you can send them to me. My email is mimi@charterforcompassion.org, and I will forward them to Vanessa, and she has graciously agreed that she will be answering questions afterwards. So thank you all for being here. Oh,
Mimi, if anyone would like to get on my mailing list, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, they can send me an email, or if you have any, just want to ask me a couple of questions just privately. I am Vanessa, VANESSA, @intentandaction.com.
Okay.
Thank you, ladies, for being here with us. It was phenomenally wonderful. I know that that's a repeat, but I am just excited that you were here, and I just really enjoyed it. And I welcome everyone to join us next month for Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, Why White People Don't Want to Talk About Racism. That'll be coming up next month. So thank you so much for being here. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.